Having spent some considerable time now talking about autotheos, the irreducible triune essence of God, in Calvin and his heirs, as an alternative to Thomas, let us press on and match what we did in the previous module and talk about a Reformed doctrine of perichoresis and its representation in special creation and covenantal condescension. Now, let me remind you and really just give a focused, very terse, encapsulated summary of what Thomas said about communal in-being in the Trinity and the way it is, quote, represented in the rational creature in the economy of grace. You'll need this by way of review so that we can frame Voss and the Reformed tradition as an alternative. Emery makes clear, following Thomas, that the communal in-being of the persons of the Trinity is A, gifted only in superadded grace to rational creatures, and B, amounts to a representing of that communal in-being in the soul of the creature who receives such grace. And so let me give you the two headings here, perichoresis and the economy of grace in Thomas. Emery says this, by way of review. The communal in-being of the persons of the Trinity creates the opportunity to gather the diverse aspects of the Trinitarian mystery into a single portrait. The substantial unity of the persons, the relations, the processions of Son and Holy Spirit, their unity in action, and their shared presence within the grace given to human beings. Boy, that's saying a lot. Let me summarize it simply. The communal in-being of the persons in their relations of subsistence and co-inherence is gifted by grace to human beings. He says, quote, the idea of perichoresis extends to the economy of grace. The gift of the Holy Spirit creates the living presence of the Son in believers because of the internal communality of the persons. Believers are united to the Father by the gift of the Holy Spirit through the presence of the Son. Now, these two quotations from Emery are important to note, since for Thomas it is only in the divine missions of sanctifying grace that the gift of the divine persons is extended to the rational creature. As the Trinitarian persons inhere essentially and personally in one another in the divine processions, so they come to inhere in or indwell rational creatures by sanctifying grace. But this is key, not by virtue of creation, but only by virtue of grace. And if you want more on that, you can read my Deeper Protestant Conception and Voss's critique of traditional Roman Catholic theology being externalistic in its religion. This is a perfect illustration of that. Now, secondly, said I'd be brief, and I'm being brief. Perichoresis is represented in the soul by grace. And that term from Thomas, that verbal choice is found in Thomas, representation of perichoresis in the soul by sanctifying grace. Emery summarizes this as very important to Thomas. Listen. He says, once having reminded us that the creature receives a likeness to the communicated divine essence in creation, he turns to the causality of the divine person's possessions within the return to God that grace effects. So, remember, I know this is review, by creation there is an exodus by which rational and volitional capacities are given to the creature. But in grace, which reflects Sacerdotalism, the living persons themselves are gifted to the rational creature, and their properties are conferred in such a way that the creature participates in their own personal properties in the processions. Now, what is the relationship then between Trinitarian perichoresis and the superadded, supernatural, deifying grace that is conferred? Here's Thomas, quote, "The restoration of the rational creature to God is comprehended in the procession of the divine persons. And this is also said of their missions," here it is, "in that the proper relation belonging to the divine person is represented in the soul through a sort of received likeness, whose exemplar and origin is the property of this same relation. Just as the mode through which the Holy Spirit is referred to the Father is love, so the proper mode of the reference to the Son of the Father to be Word who manifests Him. And this is why, just as the Holy Spirit proceeds invisibly in the Spirit through the gift of love, so likewise the Son proceeds in the Spirit through the gift of wisdom, and this manifests the Father itself, the ultimate end to which we return. And since the likeness to the properties is effected in us through the reception of these two, the person is after a new mode of existence in us, in that a thing is in its likeness, and the divine persons are said to be in us, in that our assimilation to them takes on a new modality. And it is on this basis that both processions are called mission." Do you see this? Thomas is saying this, and please grasp this: the proper relation of each person. That is the divine processions. The proper relation of the Son of the Father is filiation. The proper relation of the Spirit to the Father and the Son is spiration. Thomas is saying that reality, what is proper to the communal in-being of the persons in procession and perichoresis, is represented in the soul through a received likeness. The Son conferring knowledge, the Spirit conferring love, and these proper relations are the eternal relations in the processions, so that such is represented in the soul through ontological assimilation. That is mysticism of a very high order. Grace, in distinction from creation, affects a representation of the divine person in the rational creature that assimilates the rational creature to the eternal divine processions. It's quite remarkable. That's in Thomas's commentary on the sentences. Emery, commenting on this, just to bring it to conclusion, Emery says, "The gifts of grace with which human beings are sanctified are a different kind of reality from nature and from other goods which we receive through creation. Thomas already had said as much when he put forward the general notion of mission. The new presence of the divine persons does not consist in a change in the persons themselves, but in a change within the creature who is enlarged by a new gift of the divine person. This is why Thomas exhibits mission by way of considering the effects of the divine persons within creatures, or the new presence by which the persons are given." So Emery sums it up. The idea of perichoresis for Thomas extends to the economy of grace. The gift of the Holy Spirit creates the living presence of the Son in believers. Because of the internal communality of the persons, believers are united to the Father by the gift of the Holy Spirit through the presence of the Son. The living presence of the internal or mutual in-being of the persons is represented in the soul of the creature, who is ontologically elevated and assimilated into the divine processions. That's the key. Now, what I want to do in this lecture is provide a comprehensive Vossian alternative to Thomas's doctrine of perichoresis and representation of perichoresis by way of ontological assimilation of the creature to the processions. I want to provide a comprehensive alternative to this. Gerhardus Voss, in his Reformed Dogmatics, upholds strongly Calvin's doctrine of autotheos, and in light of that, elucidates a robust doctrine of perichoresis. And so Voss, in his RD, his Reformed Dogmatics, develops a doctrine of perichoresis, and I'm going to develop the three strands of that for you, and then apply it to a Reformed doctrine of special creation and covenantal condescension. That's the logic of this presentation. By way of brief summary statement that moves us forward here, there is a comprehensive Reformed alternative both to perichoresis and the way perichoresis is represented in the rational creature by virtue of special creation and covenantal condescension. Now, Voss offers us a summary of perichoresis that accords with Autothean personhood. That's key. That deserves emphasis. So we could say Voss offers something like this. It is Autothean perichoresis. Thomas does not have autotheos, and therefore does not have Autothean perichoresis. Voss is self-consciously forming a doctrine of Autothean perichoresis. Now, I want to give you a quote that I don't believe has received any meaningful treatment anywhere, and so I want to give it in this lecture. It's in RD1, page 46. I'll put it right here. RD1, page 46. It's kind of getting crowded there, but you see it, RD1 46. Here's Voss's definition of perichoresis that I want to break down, exposit, and then apply to image and covenant. Quote, "The ancients spoke of a perichoresis or inaparxis, a circumcessio or in extensia mutua, or a mutual in-being." That's precisely Thomas's language. "One wished to say that the persons of the Godhead are in each other reciprocally." John 14:2, 17:21, 1 Corinthians 2:11. "There is a kind of internal circulation in the Godhead, an eternal movement within the being of God." Now let me explain Voss's point in terms of three consecutive conceptual steps. And I'll give you a thesis statement. First, there is an eternal movement within the being of God. It consists in a personal circulation within the Godhead that involves, third, a mutual or reciprocal indwelling of persons in coinherence. I'm going to treat these in order, but let me give you a kind of summary statement here. Perichoresis is the mutual indwelling of Autothean persons who processionally circulate in eternal movement and ordered relations within the being of God. Now, let me try to deal with these points one by one, seriatim. Number one, eternal movement in the being of God. That's point one. In order to set this in context, remember this. Autotheos, according to Voss, requires that each Trinitarian person be God of himself and possess the entire divine essence. Each Trinitarian person is infinite, eternal, and unchangeable in his being, wisdom, holiness, power, justice, goodness, and truth. Trinitarian persons are most absolute in their being. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are infinite, eternal, and unchangeable as divine persons. And so we must say that whatever we predicate of the essence, we predicate of each person who is that essence distinctly. In fact, without getting into the background of Voss's discussion in Christology, this is why Voss would affirm, autotheos, let me do this as an aside. It won't take long. Autotheos is why Gerhardus Voss argued strenuously that the person of the Logos remains immutable in his relation to his assumed humanity in the hypostatic union. Autothean personhood secures and demands personal immutability because the person is God of himself and cannot change. It's simple and impassable. And so Voss says, here's the incarnational extension of Autothean personhood. Let me give you two quotes. In the Logos, a divine person who is immutable is present from all eternity. If there can be but one person in the mediator, and the divine person cannot be eradicated or changed, then it is self-evident that this one person is the divine person of the Logos. One can only maintain the immutability of God if one holds to the deity of the person of the mediator. And what is the deity of the person for Voss? Autotheos. He is God of himself in his processional relation from the Father. And then he says, RD3, that was RD 342, RD 347, because already in the Logos there was a divine person who could not change. So his humanity had to be impersonal, or there would have been two subjects in existence. So an immediate entailment of Autothean personhood is that the divine persons who are God from self cannot change in relation to creation or in relation to assumed humanity. This is Calvinistic orthodoxy. And the reason why a lot of evangelicals and confessional Reformed people deny the immutability of the person of the Son is they have antecedently denied autotheos. You've got a person who is not autotheos, but a mutable, contingent, creaturely thing. So why am I saying this? Autotheos requires that the Trinitarian persons are infinite, eternal, and immutable in their being and wisdom and knowledge. Yet at the same time, and this is critical to grasp, and this requires focused reflection and prayerful adoration of God, really. But at the same time, Voss argues that the doctrine of perichoresis adds, quote, an eternal movement within the Godhead. The persons are immutable, autotheos. The persons are living, perichoresis. The persons are unchanging, autotheos. The persons are moving, perichoresis. The persons are unalterable, autotheos. Yet the persons are dynamic, perichoresis. Both immutable and living. Both unchanging and moving. Both unalterable and dynamic. Perichoresis, then, and this is so helpful at laying an axe to the root of all forms of mutualism that ascribe some change to the Trinitarian persons. Perichoresis enables us to conceive of both immutable and living Trinitarian persons within the being of God. So, immutability and movement are predicated of Trinitarian persons who are God of themselves in ordered processions and in the movement, eternal movement of perichoresis. Secondly, this movement takes the form of what Voss terms, and I think quite usefully, internal circulation. Internal circulation. Voss says it's an eternal circulation of the Godhead. Now, what is Voss speaking of? It's really elementary at one level. This is Voss's way of speaking of the ordered relations of personal existence within the being of God. They circulate. There is a circulation of the persons. Remember Augustine, listen. He said that the Father has his personal existence precisely in generating the Son and spirating the Spirit, and that thus, in a certain sense, the personal existence of the Father is determined by the Son and the Spirit. You see, the personal existence of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is mutually determining. Each person has an eternal personal property, paternity, filiation, or spiration. But within that eternal movement of procession and perichoresis, what is there? There's a circulation, a circularity. The immutable and living persons within the Godhead move in ordered relations of internal circulation, mutually determining relations of opposition, mutually determining relations of co-inherence. Distinct, movement A. Indwelling, movement B. Distinct, movement A. Indwelling, movement B. Circulation among the persons of the Trinity. First circular movement, filiation. The Son is distinguished from the Father and indwells the Father. The second circular movement, spiration. The Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son in spiration and indwells the Father and Son. Circulation. These are ordered relations of opposition and co-inherence that bring into view circular movements, or in Voss's language, internal circulation. Circulation 1, filiation. Circulation 2, spiration. It is from the Father to the Son, and from the Father and the Son to the Spirit, and from the Son and the Spirit to the Father. Given that the Father is not the fountain of deity for the Son or the Spirit, and given that the persons are mutually determining and absolutely correlative within the essence of God, the circulation looks quite different than what we saw in Thomas. And that leads to the third point here. Call it reciprocal personal indwelling. Reciprocal personal indwelling. Voss says, quote, "The persons of the Godhead are in each other reciprocally." In each other reciprocally. And when you join that conception to procession, as I just did, the circulation becomes quite clear. And here's my way of putting it. Each relation of opposition, filiation and spiration, contains within it a corresponding relation of co-inherence. No sooner is the Son distinguished from the Father in generation than he indwells the Father in perichoresis. And what is that? That is an eternal movement consisting of an eternal circulation that ends in what? A reciprocal personal indwelling. A movement that is eternal, fully actualized, internal, and personal. To use Thomas's language, but to fill it with Vossian content, there is in every act of exitus a corresponding reditus among eternally correlative persons in the Trinity. The Son and the Spirit engage in eternal movement, internal circulation, reciprocal personal indwelling. So that Trinitarian perichoresis is the mutual indwelling of Autothean persons who processionally circulate in ordered relations within the being of God, and as such, indwell one another in eternal living Trinitarian beatitude. You see, perichoresis here, as we've put this so far, perichoresis supplies us with a foundational Trinitarian doctrine of divine beatitude. Voss makes this clear, and the rest of the Reformed tradition makes this clear. This is a self-contained, self-complete Trinitarian conception of beatitude. God does not stand in need of the creature. He is sufficient to himself. The beatitude of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit within the divine processions, within the divine perichoresis, is absolute, self-contained, and God does not stand in need of anything outside of himself. But in his sovereign purpose, he ordained to relate to creation and to relate to the rational creature in a twofold movement of special creation and covenantal condescension. And here's the initial thesis that we'll explore as we move this forward. Corresponding to the twofold procession and perichoresis in the Godhead is a twofold outreach to the creature in the work of special creation, the special work of creation, and in the special act of providence we call covenant. And in that special work of creation and special act of providence, what do we see? In creation, not by superadded grace, the living presence of the persons of the Godhead in perichoresis is represented in creation and covenant as the exemplary cause for Adam in fellowship with God, and as the ultimate end of beatitude for Adam in fellowship with God, as Adam stands as a federal head of the human race. Creation and covenant forge a twofold replication of the twofold processional perichoresis within the Trinity as the fundamental substance or content of the creator-creature relation in what we will call Reformed Trinitarian Federalism. And it stands comprehensively over against Thomas's Trinitarian Sacerdotalism and its nature-grace dualism. And we'll probe that as we continue to look at the organic outworking of a Reformed doctrine of Autothean perichoresis.